Great. So good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. I know we have guests that are in all three time zones. And so I say good evening, good morning. We're here in the Thomas Morris Chester Welcome Center and Research Collection, fourth month of our residency in the McCormick Riverfront Library's newest cultural asset for the city of Harrisburg, the county of Dauphin, and Commonwealth and the nation. If you were in the room, you could look around the room and you would see a set of really beautiful posters that were designed for us by the Messiah University Master's Program in History and Civic Dialogue. These set of posters represent the views from 12 buildings on the campus of the Commonwealth's capital. These 12 buildings sit on the footprint of the old 8th Ward, the historic multicultural neighborhood and predominantly African-American enterprise. Each of them is the view from a different one of those buildings. And there are, on a conservative day, good friends, between 5,000 and 8,000 people who come to the Commonwealth to work every day. Now, Mark, that's 5,000 to 8,000 people who drive in after 7 a.m. and drive out before 4:45. Doctor, that's 5,000 to 8,000 people who live here longer than the waking hours of some people who have zip codes in this, but yet they don't know that their building is on a historic community and all of the incredible things that went on in that community. And so these were designed so that if you are looking out the window where they're placed, you are looking at a view between 1870 and 1920 of the historic old 8th Ward. There's a small paragraph, and then you can hold your phone up to the QR code if you're like it, and you can find out more information about that view. So this is time travel. In the time it takes you to get on the elevator or the time it takes you to finish your coffee in one of the hallways, that temporary city that's on the footprint of our capital gets to experience the African-American experience from 1870 to 1920. We've been talking about the fact that that neighborhood was completely disseminated through decimated through eminent domain. And when I say decimated, ma'am, they took every nail, every cornerstone, every board, resold it as recycled information. If you've joined us virtually, you can go to digitalharrisburg.com and click on to look out, up and look out, and you can travel through the camera to those years. That's digitalharrisburg, all one word, .com, and you can experience these different views. The old 8th Ward has been designated as an official site by the Network to Freedom, the National Park Services Network to Freedom is the official U.S. Underground Railroad network. And our program in general, and that site specifically, has been designated a Network to Freedom site. In our first program, we had Dr. Kamika Campbell with us, and it was a pretty dynamic conversation that we had. At the end of her program, those of you who follow us may remember, I asked Dr. Campbell if we had African-American conferences in our downtown, if we had African-American tourists in our Hilton or in our Crown Plaza, if we had African-American guests come to our home and we had to go to work the next day, what would we tell them to do? Where would we tell them to go? And I asked the audience, could they name 10 cultural experiences, African-American cultural experiences in Harrisburg that we would make a 2.5-day a weekend experience? Doctor, that stumped us. I see you thinking, those of you who are out there, those of you who are in front of me and behind me and beyond, we're still trying to come up with 5, that would be a continuous experience. And so I said, well, maybe we need to have a green book of our own. The family of Kim and Brian Williams and Libby and her son heard our call, and they've come to present the first of many objects that we would like to present to the McCormick Library and the Chester Collection. And this young man will present to Mark Smith, who is a board member of the Dauphin County Library System, a copy of the Green Book for us to build on, and hopefully we'll be able to fill in between these historic pages, African-American cultural economy that constitutes and builds an experience. So Isaiah, if you would like to give Mr. Mark Smith, a great historian himself, this book. And would you tell him your name? And how did you get this book? Your family members?
Well, if Zakai has experiences like me, my parents always were instrumental in helping me to learn. And so I'm sure that Zakai's parents and his family, the entire family helped. And so it's a family effort.
And he's been at every one of our events. And really, they in the Civil War, they used to have a mascot and a daughter of the regiment. And he's been kind of like the mascot and a son of the regiment in every one of our endeavors to bring peace places to Harrisburg. And so I thank you, young man. Now I'm going to ask you for a favor, okay? So we're about 1 block away from us. How old are you? 6. 1 block away from us is the Harrisburg time capsule. And it's supposed to be opened in 2060. In 2060, which is 37 years from now, you'll be 43 years old. And I would like you to do a favor for all of us and be around, okay? Stay here, stay healthy, so that you can be there to open the time capsule and put something in for the next generation. Will you do that for me? Stay healthy, stay smart, stay strong, young warrior, and we hope you'll stand there for us in 2060. You'll be younger than my children, so I'm going to count on you. Okay, let's give the little gentleman a hand. And if you and Mr. Mark Smith will go over there and you can show him through the book, we will thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I am honored.
Mark Smith is a newest member, Mark, should I say, of the board of directors?
Yes, I'm one of the 2 newest members of the board of directors of the Dauphin County Library System.
So we're very excited to have you there, particularly with the growth of the development of the Chester Welcome Center and collection. And hopefully we will find a Harrisburg page for each page that is in that present book. Thank you to Kim Williams out there, Kim, I hope somewhere, to Ryan Williams, and little man, you have to come and see us a great deal, okay? Grow up with us, okay? Thank you, thank you. Our good friend Barbara Barksdale has an update for us on the Pennsylvania Hollow Ground Project. You may remember that in our second session, our guests were from the Lincoln Cemetery and the Pennsylvania Hollow Ground Project. Barbara is the executive director of the Hollow Ground Project, which maintains, preserves, conserves, and restores African-American grave sites across the Commonwealth. And Barbara has some updates of events that are going to happen between now and the next time we see you in March. Barb?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Linwood, for having me on part of your program. I think, can you hear me?
You've got your mute on, Barb.
It's not on.
Barb, I'm sorry, it's on my end. One moment, please.
Okay.
The Pennsylvania Hollow Ground Project is a private public partnership of organizations and communities across all 67 counties. Gentlemen, you're picking up on the microphone. Is all 67 counties. We're in search of African-American cemeteries and graveyards, and that organization was formed in 2008, established with the help of Shippensburg University and Barbara at Midland. And they've done outstanding work restoring African-American grave sites. So, Barb?
Okay, shall I try it again? Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I won't take too much of your time because I know you're probably on a time restraint also, but I have to start off, Linwood, by saying that Mr. Mark Smith, who just left from the circle there, he has a lot of heritage in this area, and especially one that is connected with Midland Cemetery, because his grandfather, great-grandfather is buried there, all right? And he was part of the group of people that came in here to the north in the 1800s and settled down and actually helped to form our first school for children of color. All right, so Mr. Smith has a lot to do with the wonderful historic Midland Cemetery, which, by the way, I have to tell you this before I get into the hallowed grounds. As of last Tuesday, not this past Tuesday, but last Tuesday on the 7th, the historic, beautiful, wonderful, my cemetery, Midland Cemetery, is now going on to the National Register for Historic Places. So yay!
Oh, bravo, bravo.
Hallelujah, hallelujah. I've been working on that forever and a day. So I'm just like so excited. But that kind of leads us into the PA Hallowed Grounds. The Hallowed Grounds started, like Linwood said, some years ago. I've been on it since the beginning, trying to make sure that I've been supportive and the people have been supporting us and me to make sure that we are looking for those cemeteries that have the United States colored troops interred in them. That's how it kind of got started, looking for the USCT. And so we're still looking for those people, as well as their descendants, and maybe even those ancestors of the USCT, and also looking at their stories. How did they get here? What was their family life like? And really doing good documentation on all of them, from the beginning to the end, whether they came in the 1619s and forward, or if they're still here and their children or grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren are still here, and what's going on with them. So we're trying to make sure that we're taking care of those cemeteries. We're trying to find those cemeteries that are under mailboxes, under highways, byways, and those that are still where you can visually say that there is a cemetery there, but it needs to be cleaned up. So what do we do? So right now, what we're doing is we have several grants out there. One we had as a pilot program back in the fall of this past year, and we selected 3 cemeteries and we hired a consultant to work with those cemeteries. So now we're doing it again. So right now we have a grant out there for the stewards. We're looking for the stewards of these cemeteries. And right now we have 154 cemeteries that are, cataloged for ourselves. There's so many more, many more. But right now, 154 that we know of that we have verified and know the validity of all of them. So what we're asking those stewards to do is to go online, because we have it out there issued to all of them through emails and such, that this steward program is happening where they can tell us what their needs are, and we're going to try to accommodate at least 10 of those stewards to get a, some kind of, support, whether it's going to be just a consultant that will help them, or maybe a consultant and some money, once they figure out what they really need to do. Like, let's say, if they, like in Midland Cemetery, as you see right behind me, I'm not in the cemetery, folks, so some people see that and they think I'm out there in the cemetery in the rain and the snow for some silly reason, but maybe it's a tree that needs to be taken down. And so how do we get that person in there to say, okay, this is a tree, maybe you got 2 or 3 trees, and it's going to cost about $1,000 to $1,200 or more, depends on the size of the tree to take it down. So can we afford to do 1 or 2 trees? Do we need any help with landscaping, as well as definitely taking care of the headstones? How do we get them cleaned? How do we get them restored? Have they fallen over and have to be foundation redone? All that type of thing. So that consultant will help to lead and guide that steward that may need help. And maybe the stewards don't really need all that kind of help. They just need to have more office help, as far as like, do they have their 501c3? Do they have someone who's helping them to acquire grants? Do they have someone who is looking out for them and promoting them? How are they grabbing their volunteers? Do they need volunteers to come in? And how big is the cemetery? Is it small, like maybe a small block, that could be just maybe 20 bodies in there? Or is it one that has several thousand bodies in it? So what do they need? What is the task that is to be addressed, and how can they be helped by the consultants and also the volunteers? So that's what it's really all about at this point. So our focus for this past week, and this will be active until March the 6th, where we can take in those who want to apply for the grant right now that's out there. And within probably the next week or so, we'll start putting, we already started putting it together, the one for the consultants. And the consultants will go on site, take a look at the site. And then what you've been there before, how you went to the different sites to take a look at them and see what the needs were. And so we're looking for a company or companies that will help us do this throughout the entire state of Pennsylvania.
So let me catch up with you, Barb, because we're putting out 4 different calls, good friends. The first, you should know that Barbara and her organization are putting out a call. They have raised technical assistance support funds, and they will be giving out small grants to stewardship sites who need assistance. 2 words she said that you need to be clear about. One is grant and the other is application. So they're calling for applications by March 6th, is it?
March the 6th, yes.
By March 6th, from affiliated and unaffiliated. Sometimes these are church sites. Sometimes there are Masonic lodges. Sometimes they're just neighbors who know where there's a site. Sometimes it's a family that has reunion that has adopted a site every year. So the first thing is they're calling for sites. Secondly, they're calling for people who have expertise, people who may know how to grind stones, clean stones, reset stones. These stones are 300, 500, 700 pounds sometimes.
Yeah.
And so small contractors who might be able to provide that technical assistance. Barbara gave me a science class, by the way, Mark, when we went out to fill gopher holes with kitty litter, so that the gophers wouldn't kill the trees. Another group of artists were carving a lovely totem piece of art out of the stump of an old tree. So you can be creative as well as conservation. And then they're calling for volunteers for their work days. And when are your work days this year, Barb?
Well, it seemed like the weather is making us go a little quicker than normal, because as you see, yesterday was around 60 degrees, and today is a little cooler, but things are starting to bud up. So it's going to be on depending on the location of the cemetery and how quick their grass and their weeds may grow, and also if they're going to be prepared for any kind of cleanup. Hopefully, I would say at the earliest that people are going to be out there starting to clean up, and that's to remove old tree branches and things that came down, would probably be near the end of March, because that's when I'm going to be kicking mine off at Midland Cemetery. And then, of course, we work all the way through April, and that's usually on the weekends, for several hours. And then we get ready for Memorial Day. So there's a lot of little things that can happen between now and then. We are, with the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds, having a special day on Earth Day, which is April the 22nd. And we're looking for volunteers around the entire state, actually around the nation and international, because Earth Day is an international event. But we're looking for volunteers to go to these particular cemeteries that the stewards need to help do with the cleaning of those branches and weeds and trees and everything else, and starting to get it cleaned up and ready for Memorial Day if they're planning on having an event. So it's an ongoing process. It does not stop. And the best thing we can do is that, we try to be supportive to each other and give them that shoulder to lean on, that arm to lean on, and just let them know that we are there for them. The amount of the grant that we're looking to give out to these here stores with this next round is between $3,000 to $7,000. And like I said, it's going to be up to 10 cemeteries. So
we're giving out loaves and fish grants here. We're asking you to roll your sleeves up and stick your hands down into history. You can really put your hands in history and help us rediscover graves, repair graves that have been discovered. And also, Barbara has also taught me a great deal about the fact that our Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day, a day where churches would go out to the cemeteries and work. Our next session is March 16th. So her March deadline will be over, and we wanted you to get this information today. But we'll also remind you about her Earth Day in March, when we have Rachel Williams from Lincoln Cemetery with us. Barb,
yes,
website or?
Well, they can go to the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds website, which is, PA hallowedgrounds.com, and grab up all their information. Or, we have pahallowedgrounds.org, and we have one.com. There is lots of information. You go to actually to Midland Cemetery page, or even to the Facebook is out there. We're trying to get it out in all different kind of ways, not only just sending out information through our email list listing to the stewards and cemeteries, but also to we're trying to hit it nationwide, because we need the stewards, but we also need those people who are going to be the consultants. And our last consultant that we just hired is actually from North Carolina. So we need I would like to get some homegrown folks up in here, to apply for these here consultant positions too, So if we can get the word out, and if you gentlemen and ladies will share your information with me, I would be glad to share our information with you directly, so that maybe you can send it out to other consultants and such like that. So, boost our numbers and hit on our homegrown folks. We need all the help we can get to get the information out there. Okay.
And thank you, Barbara, for the incredible work that you do. I want to say to you all that The Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds Project invites those of you who are with us virtually to put into the chat an African American cemetery that you might know in your neighborhood, or an organization that you might know, so that we can grow that list. And also, Barb, I'd like to extend an invitation to you to put up on our Chester collection site the map of your 150 cemeteries. That would be a really incredible, actually, resource for us to have. Okay, so remember our philosophy of animating democracy is that there are all kinds of ways that you can animate. Sweat equity is one really good way. And so again, I invite you to roll up your sleeves and stick your hands in history. Get involved. 72 of the 100 voices that we honor are in the Midland, the Lincoln, or the William Howard Day Cemetery. So right here in Dauphin County, there are at least 3 partners that we thank you very much, Barb, and kudos to you for your work to be on the National Trust. I know that's been really took a long work.
Yeah, the National Register,
Yeah.
right? Yes, indeed. It's been a long journey, but it's been worth it. And, you know, anything that we can do to remember our ancestors, whether they're kinfolk by DNA or just because of the things that they did in surviving, is so important. And to honor those who were enslaved, those freedom seekers, the USCT, the Buffalo Soldiers, Tuskegee Airmen, so on and so forth, and the people that started our churches right here in our area that we're sitting in right now is so important, because our reach expands beyond the borders of Dauphin County, beyond the borders of Pennsylvania, and it reaches all the way to the other side of the world. So we need to make sure we're protecting it.
2 quick things for those of you who joined us virtually and those of you who are here. I was serious about the fact that your cat could contribute too. The cost of kitty litter, which fills the holes and the potholes in the cemeteries so that the ground doesn't erode, costs these cemeteries a great deal every spring. And so you can literally drop it off to one of your cemeteries, okay?
For sure, for sure.
And then the other thing is, I have to remind you, my grandmother and her sisters religiously went out to the cemetery every Memorial Day and whitewashed the stones of the graves so that they would look beautiful and clean. Little did we know that the lime in the whitewash was eating the stone away. You know, it was the right deed, but for the wrong reason. And so you might, if you are preserving the gravestone of your loved ones, you might look on their site, because there are some tips. Thank you very much. We'll move on. Please stay with us if you can. So we've been having these conversations with the grace and the support of the Giant Company and their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. They have supported the Thomas Morris Chester Welcome Center and the Research Collection and our Pennsylvania Past Players to tell the stories of invisible people. It's one of their giant DEI initiatives, and we discovered that they have some incredible number of DEI officers across the entire Giant Company. I was with the brilliant Tina Nixon today from UPMC, speaking to her diversity and inclusion leaders, and we know that the nation, as a result of the COVID climate and its impact on African Americans, the result of Black Lives Matter, and just the friction and cacophony of political events, that we have been placing diversity, equity, and inclusion at the top of the agendas from schools and churches to corporations. And so I asked Dr. Wanda Knight if she would join us today and talk about her journey to DEI, the work that she's doing at the university, and also to give us a kind of report card on DEI. How are we doing? What are we saying that we're doing? How are we really doing? What's left to be done? And what kind of forever vigilance we need to have. Welcome, Dr. Knight.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Tell us first about your work and how it drew you to your current position.
Okay, I'm wondering, can people hear me? Because I've muted myself so that it wouldn't get the reverberation. And if my computer goes out, I may need an extension cord, but for right now, I think I'm okay, but it might just happen. How my work currently, I serve as the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Penn State Harrisburg. I've been also a professor of art education, African American studies, and women's gender and sexuality studies at University Park. And I did that for about 20 years. So I'm fairly new to this region of the Commonwealth. I've been here now, this is a year and a half. So, and I took on this role because I saw it's an inaugural role. So I saw a great opportunity to lay a foundation for something sustainable.
An inaugural role.
Yes.
Expand on that.
An inaugural role, in other words, this position has not existed previously. So I'm the first dean in this capacity. So I get to build an infrastructure that is, I'm hoping, sustainable. And some of the things that I'm doing now, the board of advisors, so externally facing, internally facing groups, to come along. This work one cannot do alone. So that is the nature of the work that I'm doing.
Now, you all know I refer to the great galactical blackboard, things that we should put up on right across the sky. So we will put up across the sky, this work cannot be done alone. So Doctor, if I might ask you to share with us, to the degree that you'd like to, what was the job description when you came? What was the condition of the job that you found? And what were the first challenges for you?
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll have some images that I think a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words. So I do have some imagery, being that I have a background in the arts as well. But when I came to this role, I saw a campus that touts itself as being the most diverse campus of all of Penn State campuses. And yet I was questioning how we are leveraging that diversity. So its condition is that people were thirsty. They were looking to have a culture built that they could feel a sense of belonging and inclusiveness. I just saw people wanting community, and I saw a lot of things happening, but they were happening in silos. And there was little coordination of efforts and energies. So I think those disparate kinds of things can make people tired because they may not see the fruit of their labor as readily as if it were coordinated. So
how did they describe the job that drew you?
Well, it talked about, I would head the development of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I would work with other administrative units inside campus, outside. I saw the opportunity to build campus, use our campus, which sits right here in this region. It has the potential to build community. We have people that have attended the campus, but yet when they leave, I wonder what the connection is. So really it was about, one, leading any and all things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and working with administrative units multidisciplinary across campus. So in this case, this position is the thread or the glue, in my opinion, to all those silos. You have all of these areas, yet this is the glue and the thread that builds the tapestry, this tapestry of diversity, if one might call it that.
And what did your colleagues, your community and your constituents assume or expect that you would accomplish?
They thought I was going to solve the problems of the world.
Amen. Yeah.
And I constantly said, and I have some images regarding that, that this is not just my work. And I don't call it DEI. I said DE and I, because I want everybody to be able to see themselves in this work, because this is everybody's work. And when they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, let's start back. What are we going to do? Because you have as much of an opportunity to be an agent of change as I do. And we have to work together collaboratively to make sure this happens.
So we are using the same words that you're using. How do you define diversity?
Well, you know, I got a slide that actually does that.
Should we share?
This might be a great time. And one of the things I want us to think about, and this is what I tell the staff, faculty, students, community members, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is for everybody. And I have a definition, and I talk about why sometimes people think it's for the other, not necessarily for them. So let's see if I can share this screen, and then I'll stop at certain points, but I think this would be.
Yes, ma'am. You guide us through your images as I guide us through our conversation.
Okay, I
and I'm
appreciate that.
interested so that we see the world that Dr. Knight sees, and so that we speak the words she speaks. The definitions of diversity, the definitions of equity, the definitions of inclusion change depending upon who is viewing it.
So am I in prison again?
You all know I wear glasses, and I believe that I came out of my mother's womb with glasses on. I wore glasses since I was about 9 months old. But if you've ever worn glasses and you've ever gone to a optometrist, you know they sit you down in front of a machine, and they move lenses, and they say, is this clear or this clear? Is this? How do I know what is clear when I've been blind all my life? So if I'm blind to diversity, where do I begin? And we're working, as you know, me in technology, but we're.
I think it'd be hopefully worth it once we get to where we need to be, because I think because sometimes I think about the visuality of people, they get to see. And
We're working on sharing the screen.
Well, you know what? I'm going to just talk to this and not worry about what else is there. So that's okay. I don't know why it's not doing. Yeah, it did. It worked earlier, but
It always works in the tech, and but the question that I had is that these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, have become like a mirror, doctor, that whoever holds those words up sees themselves in it. Absolutely. But maybe doesn't see others. So how do you define these words to frame and start the parameters? And I was saying that if I'm blind to the fact that I'm not inclusive, then where do we begin?
Okay, well, I'm going to, it's too bad that it won't show, but I want people to be able to see. So what I have is so you're just gonna see where my other slides are, because for some reason it's like when I stop share. But basically my work, so what did it just do?
I'm sorry, I'm moving that.
Okay, so, and it's too bad you don't see it in a broad sense, but a lot of my work is about breaking barriers. So when I think about diversity, And I'm looking to lay a foundation for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And there's a correlation between these areas. So let me, well, I'm just having a good old time here. Well, anyways, here's how I'm defining diversity. For some reason, I'm not.
We'll
getting
work,
prepared.
we'll work with this.
Okay. So if y'all look good with this.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
so the notion of diversity, what I start off, no matter who people are, I let them know that everybody's different. So I talk about diversity in its broadest sense. I get people to think about what is diversity in terms of there are observable and non-observable individual differences. It could be life experiences, work context, work styles, personality types, social differences, race, ethnicity, gender, identity, and expression, age. So it's all of these things, but sometimes when you have everything, you have nothing. So I do focus sometimes on certain terms. And then I think all of these things can contribute to organizational and community vibrancy. I even talk about, and people who might say, well, yeah, everybody's different. I said, well, think about your fingerprints. Everybody, no two people have the same fingerprints, no matter who you are. So you are in a great position to show your uniqueness. And being in the arts, I think about diversity itself means that we're valuable from my perspective. We are originals. Originals are more valuable than copies. So why do we need to be a copy? So that's what I tell people. When we try to assimilate, we're trying to be somebody else. We're not being ourselves. So that's how I talk about diversity. So everybody gets to see themselves as a
You know,
different
Doctor,
person.
we have here at the Research Collective a saying that we don't talk about melting pot, because in melting pot, everybody loses their identity.
Yes,
We talk about gumbo,
gumbo.
where the okra stays okra and the sausage stays sausage, but they're just loving each other in that roux. You know, they're just love, and that notion of making gumbo cultures as opposed to melting pot cultures, which we spent the last century melting down difference.
Absolutely.
And we also talk a lot about you're Jewish, I'm African American, he's Hindu, and we're all digging each other.
Exactly.
You know, on St. Patrick's Day, we can all be green, and on Cinco de Mayo, we can all be, as opposed to the notion of what some American cultures are doing with assimilation and fusion and confusion. And I'd like you to speak to that, because, you know, in America, we make fajita pitas and pizza bagels, and, you know, we take things and we put them together. But is that good? Is that bad? Where does the integrity of one begin and end?
Well, we're in agreement that any amalgam, it takes on its own kind of tone, or when we blend things. So I agree. I don't agree with the so-called melting pot, because we don't know what that is, and it's something that's similar. I like to use in the arts a mosaic, because it each has its own individual pieces, and yet it makes for the bigger picture. Some people like to use a salad, but salad has its own distinct flavor. But I think the part that comes in is the assimilations, when you put all that dressing over it, and you get to not feel the taste and flavors of some of the unique ingredients. So I do think that more people are comfortable with themselves, and people like themselves. So it's best to say, and then when we start to say, what is this amalgam or this melting pot, or when we try to make people assimilate, whose culture would that be? And it's usually the dominant culture. And those people who have privileges and power to set certain standards and make certain guidelines and rules.
This is the struggle that we're having with capitalizing the B in Black, and speaking quite fluently about the fact that Black is not an adjective, unless you are actually talking about the clothes that I have on, not the color of my skin. You know, if I choose to use the noun, then you follow the rule of capitalizing that noun. And this was the crisis of the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the century, with men like William Whipper, who struggled to capitalize the N in Negro
Mhm.
so that it wasn't the Latin-based Black, but it was the proper noun of the people. It has changed in my life from my grandfather referring to himself as a colored man and my grandchildren referring to themselves as people of color, but meaning two different things and stretching a long time, the reappropriation of words. So we have this diversity about pronouns and nouns and the Chicago school and people saying, yes, but it's not correct. I'm saying who's determines correctness. So that's why I say in our sense of fusion, we can confuse ourselves. And what are some of the biggest, I don't want to say mistakes, but pitfalls that programs that are setting out to do the right thing fall into in this current movement of DEI?
Thank you for that. And particularly when you think about language, I think I pay a lot of attention to language. Language is a tool of thought. And how we think affects how we act. And how we act habitually becomes who we are. So I do think about, and one of the pitfalls is that I look at like this next slide that deals with equality. Some people conflate the terms equality and equity, and they are very different. And when I see people trying to do the sameness, then that's when we make some major mistakes. Because if we're different, why do we need the same? And everybody has unique needs. So if I say, well, to be fair, I'm going to do the same for everyone, because if you need something extra, I have to do it for everyone. That's not true. Because you need a size 12 shoe. If I give everybody a size 12, you might be just fine, but many other people will not be. So this notion of equity and equality, and I like to use that little example of sameness. So you have people who are different in various ways, some vertically challenged and others are not. And then people think that that's fair, but there are barriers that are created given some of our differences. People are fine, it's until we get into a situation or a context in which there is a barrier, and that's when we fail to thrive. So I like to talk to people about the notion of equality as opposed to equity. And in this illustration, you'll see equity, the difference. So the vertical challenged person gets what they need to be successful or to thrive, as opposed to equality. I see so many people falling and they don't know the difference between equity and equality because they use those terms synonymously. And so I like to help people understand that equity for me refers to conditions that support fairness and justice based on individual needs and circumstance, where all individuals have opportunities to thrive and realize their best. Notice I didn't say survive, I said thrive, because we all deserve to thrive in whatever way is best for us. So that's another reason why I've focused on how do you break barriers and you dismantle them. And that's a lot of the work that I'm doing. And we have to think about what those barriers are.
Now I'm gonna put up on this great galactical blackboard, not only surviving, but thriving, because that's a whole different paradigm to simply survive, to thrive. But before we go forward, could we go back? You said diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then you added belonging.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between inclusion and belonging?
So when we look at equity and inclusion, and I say it's for everyone, they overlap. Because people who are diverse, if we provide equitable situations and outcomes, there's a better opportunity that they will be included. According to, Verna Brown, she said she's a recovering attorney. She says that
A recovering attorney.
she's a recovering attorney. And she said that, and she moved out of actually law in some ways to talk about these very issues, because she said that if diversity is being invited to the party, then inclusion is being asked to dance. You have to think about, we invite people to the table, but their voices are not heard. So when we value the voices of individuals and people, then there's a sense of belonging. I belong at this table versus I don't belong here. This is not for me. And that's a different kind
I,
of message.
I want to go back to that quickly, Doctor, because last month we were talking about this notion of invisible barriers. We don't go there. We don't belong there. Yeah, our people don't participate in that, you know? And we were talking about who establishes those invisible boundaries, how memory plays into that. And those of you who were not with us, we use the example of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, capital of Pennsylvania, the fourth state in the nation to ratify the 15th Amendment, the seventh to ratify the 19th Amendment. Still, Harrisburg, when they named Market Street, Dr. Martin Luther King Drive, the merchants revolted. They refused. There is a public works office, Sharia, out on Arsenal that has over 400 street signs that say Martin Luther King Boulevard, leaning against a wall, because the perception was, I'm not going to put that name up. But
Address.
yes, that address up. And also then the perception is, then if you don't put the name up, I'm not coming down there. And so now we have a modern group of people who don't know that history of, they do not know the history of the private militia that was hired to protect City Island, which stopped people from crossing the bridge, you know, and now why we don't go there. So how do you take down the damage? I mean, we can take down the sign, but how do we take down the damage of this crisis?
I appreciate that. And I'm just wondering at some point, just in case, and again, I'd like to show kind of visuals. I think what you just described is the history. I don't think it's going to go too far. Is knowing our history, what you described as history. And I'm going to quickly move through something that I think some of that deals with looking back, looking around, and looking forward. And when we look back, it gives us some hindsight where we have been, and that helps us understand where we've been. Also, it gives us some insight if we start to look around, and this helps us look at where we're going in order to move forward. So I think if we were to look at, I think a lot of people just don't know the history. And that's why we're bound to repeat it, or it gets erased, or it is somehow misunderstood. So I would hope that we could think about Sankofa and how do we reach back and pull things forward so that generation after generation can be educated in ways that help them see the need to be activists and agents of change, and take on the legacy of moving toward progress like our ancestors did. If not, we're being remiss at some point, and we just need to continue to work in those spaces.
Dr. Agents of Change, you're our change agent for this evening, and it's so exciting. What change have you seen since you started this job, and what backward motion are we caught in now?
Thank you. I have seen a lot of progress on campus, but it hasn't been without me going against the winds of resistance. The winds of resistance are fierce and they're mighty, and you just have to buckle up and push through. So there are things that I've instituted, for example, fireside chats. And fireside chats are where I bring people with all perspectives together. The first topic we dealt with was women's reproductive rights, who decides. And, you know, major people showed up in official capacities coming with their speeches, but we walked away. It was designed to be a productive dialogue rather than a polarizing debate. And that's really critical for me, to hear all voices. Because when we talk about inclusion, many people only want to include the voices that they want to hear. But it's a paradox, because when we say all voices are welcome, then we have to welcome our voices, or just say, well, I don't want your voice and I don't want yours. But we've had those same things happen to us in the past. So I've instituted for the first time in the central region, we had a Dr. Martin Luther King banquet where more than 330 people showed up throughout the community. This was very much an initiative in which Penn State didn't bring something to the community. The community, we came together, we planned, we were co-presenters. We recognized people in the community who was doing this wonderful and tremendous work. And some of the things that I think that are happening, this kind of work is under siege. When you look at my last fireside chat was last week, it was on critical race theory. And looking at some of the tenets that are challenged regarding that work. The second fireside chat was on affirmative action. So these are what I call them fireside chats. I deal with the hot topics, the polemics, to bring people together, to let them know that we can be civil, we can have civil conversations without attacking each other, and then we walk away. And I do set community agreements of how we show respect. A civil conversation means we're showing respect for other people and ourselves. So some of the work that, even just today, there's a whole article regarding some of my initiatives. And then I was briefed today that there were threats about this. Sometimes you have major donors says, well, this community is too woke. And I'm just ready to pull my philanthropic endeavors away from you. And we have to make a decision whether we allow that kind of bullying to stop our endeavors, or do we say, okay, goodbye, you'll leave, but others will come who support that work?
You know, Doctor, we applaud, we meaning the Commonwealth Monument Project and the Pennsylvania Past Players, applaud the board of the Dauphin County Library System because they rose to the challenge. We gave them a list of 150 books and topics, many of which are sitting right behind you now, and the compliments of children's books of these contents, to begin to build that vocabulary of new thought and new change around this topic. And yet we see libraries across the Commonwealth and then the nation being challenged, their librarians and their boards being challenged. What advice would you give them to stay the course and keep your hands on the bloodstained banner?
Hey, hello. You know, and again, I see it as a form of bullying, and we have to drown out those voices. If we retreat, then people have achieved what they're hoping to achieve. But I would hope people would, again, see their role, DE&I. So whatever level of influence we have, monumental or minuscule, we should be able to utilize that level of influence within our own and feel like we have contributed. Some people are more out front and forward facing, and others are working behind the scenes. But I would say that I think about a dog, and one flea doesn't matter on the dog sometimes, but enough committed fleas strategically biting will make that dog move and scratch and react. So I think that if we collectively work together and strategically, then I believe we can get what we want to get accomplished and stay the course. And I think about this kind of work as being a relay race. I used to be a marathoner and running relays, and you have to hand off that baton. I see that as legacies. So when somebody gets tired or whatever, you run that leg and another one, but you got to keep moving. And Dr. King says that, you know, if you can't run, then you walk. If you can't walk, then you crawl, but you just got to keep moving. And this isn't, I think, a call for us to continue to keep moving, because those voices are trying to drown out fear, fright, leads to this kind of flight, and not facing truths, erasing histories because of, I'm using the word white fragility. That's a book called White Fragility, that people our poor kids are being harmed, but what about other kids, the browns and black ones that are being harmed? and we are denying them the education that we deserve. It doesn't mean that we hate this country, but we have to speak truth to power. And that's it.
So Doctor, I want to ask you a few more questions, and then I'll ask you if you'll go through your slides of anything that I didn't touch upon that's important. But you have overlapping communities that you have to serve. You have your undergraduate and graduate community, which are coming to a place to be woke. So kind of how do you tell them to not to wake up too much? Or I mean, inside of that university climate is a community that challenges thought. So how do we, inside of our institutions, simultaneously ask people to wake up and tell them, but not too much?
Not
And
too much.
what is the dynamic of trustees, of boards, of deans, of adjuncts, of guests, fitting into the paradigm of people who are saying a little more, but not too much?
I think I'm seeing a lot of educators who there are some that are taking risks. And it's not just the brown and black folks that are saying, wait a minute, I want my kids to live in a world that doesn't look like some of the things we're currently seeing. And so they're taking activist stance. But when they see, but who determines how woke is woke, right? Because that may be all relative. But the notion of wokeness in a higher education, and then for people to try to, censor how we teach, determine the politics that get involved. But I know teaching is political because based on what we teach and what we don't teach, because we're making a conscious decision or an unconscious decision as to what we think is valuable. So therefore, I think it's very, very hard for students. It's confusing. When I see more grad students, people like to say for the undergrad, that's kind of indoctrination. But it's indoctrination when you don't do it, because we're trying to control thought and have a particular outcome as well. So I think people can be as woke as they do. And it's been my experience that students get excited. They're like, I never knew this. I gave them the example when we did critical race theory. Penn State has this mantra, we are. I said Penn State. We are. We said 3 times, Penn State. We are Penn State. And then I say, thank you. And they said, you're welcome. I said, do you know where that came from? And they're like, no. I said, that came out of racist times. And when Wally Triplett, when we went to a bowl game and they wouldn't let Black people stay in the hotel and couldn't even play the game. And they said, well, we're a team. We are Penn State. And I said, now, do you hate Penn State? They're like, no. I said, okay, you learned about Black history. And you learned about critical race kinds of topics. I'm not using a framework, but by the same token, I said, now you learn, and they are excited to learn about these areas. And it's been my experience that many want to be woke.
That brings me to that second part of my question about the communities that you serve, Doctor, because you also have an alumni community that has a very fixed image of what Penn State is, and therefore what Penn State is not.
Yes.
And how do you deal with the calcification of identity?
Wow, that's a great question. And I just have to note also, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of Penn State when I sit here.
Yes, ma'am.
That is my employee, but I do think about how the alums most want these efforts, but no doubt there are areas where many just do not, and they have expressed it in various ways, and sometimes pretty harsh ways that, we're moving. They remember what it used to be like, and now it's changing where the world is changing. There's more diversity. It took 100 years, over 100 years before Penn State hired its first Black professor, over 100 years. And then to have its first Black student. So you had a century that a place existed before even one Black faculty member. Look at how many generations there are. So there are some who want to see those days, return, and they reminisce about it or tell you about the legacy. When my father went here, my grandparents. So I think that's really a challenge, but yet we still continue to, when I work with the community, for example, I'm recruiting some of those board members to be on board, and that brings them in and let them have a voice, and they get a chance to have a firsthand experience as to what this can be and is, and have a voice as opposed to looking on the outside. Now, I invite them in. I like to call people in versus calling them out.
And that brings me to that third community, which are the children of the children that you're teaching, and the seeding of philosophies and cultures. What do you see on the horizon for the generation that you are lifting up? Maybe not the faculty or the administration that you're negotiating, but the generation that you're lifting up.
Thank you for that question too. I see for that generation, first of all, the people that we're teaching will be the first teachers of those people. We are not their first teacher, their parents are their first teachers. So as I see people who are gaining knowledge, and many say they have to make decisions as to how they want to parent or teach their kids, because they're introducing them to concepts in the world, and they really are at an early age forming how they'll think about. I like to think about two pieces. One of those is they're framing the worldview. They have a worldview, and as a consequence, it's somehow they're infiltrating their children's thinking. And I think that can be in the DNA somehow. And as they pass it on, and unless they are intentional about countering bias, countering racism, and when I say racism in the system, and most people are, and these are people of color too, because some people of color don't want anything to do with diversity because they think I'm assimilated. I don't want people to notice difference. Let's have a colorblind society. And we know that we see color. We know that it has some real implications for our ability to thrive.
So two more questions will lead me to introduce you to my dear friend, Roz McPherson, who I'm pointing to your screen, but I do want the two more questions, and then we'll look at anything that I forgot to ask you. But the first question is, if you were building a Mount Rushmore for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you were putting up the leaders of the movement as it stands today, who would you put up there?
They probably would be people that nobody knew. Because sometimes we always think of the same leaders, and we don't sometimes lift those that are doing work that's equally impactful. They just don't have the notoriety. And when I say that, I think some people have led movements and they didn't even know that they were making a difference. I have to, but if I have to name a name, I think it's about somebody like Bree Newsom, who took the flag down from South Carolina up atop this pole. When she tells her story, she talks about, the strategy. This is intentional. She didn't just climb that pole, she practiced climbing poles. She, the group worked with her. It was a collaborative effort. She may have gotten most of the credit, but she talked about them running and jogging and watching the police as they moved about, and they would know when they made their circles and they would run. They looked at who was going to protect her. And she said that even the police officer was going to tase her, which would have killed her, cost her life on a metal pole. And those people came together and said, stood there, you better not. So they were even protecting her in that space, as opposed to, whoops, let me get out of here because you might get me too.
Okay.
They stood.
Google her now, you friends. Google her. She's going to be one of those folks that we put up on our Mount Rushmore of DEI.
I think so, because and she knew, and she said that you couldn't tell a soul because they would meet secretly, and you couldn't tell anyone because as soon as you do it, your parents and people are going to talk you out of it. Please don't. What if something, and then that infiltrates your thinking in your head that you may not move forward, and then also, and also thinking this may be the last day that I see my family, but yet was willing to move forward and do that, and that's a person less known than somebody like a Dr. Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks or some of those people that tend to get a lot of the, and not that they shouldn't, they should, but there are people that many people may not know, but she would be one that I would put on that Mount Rushmore, particularly as a young person as well, who would, and we need, again, that baton passing, the next legacy, because if not, when people die off, people looking for new heroes when the hero is within themselves.
And Dr., my last question is, I owe the world an apology because I spent 25 years in philanthropy, at 10 of which were at the National Endowment for the Arts. I worked for 4 governors as a grant maker, and I wrote those guidelines that people applied for. And by the time they got the grant and started the program, we had moved on to something else. And then, we had lured them. I refer to them as grant hounds. Lovingly, I refer to them as people who needed to sustain themselves by fitting into the guidelines that the philanthropists, the foundations, the corporations. So the corporations are wild about DEI now. They're writing DEI programs. There are millions of dollars being given out. How long will that last? And what should we be ready for in the movement, in the wave, in the season that we're in? And how strategically should we make it work, if we know that this too will pass, unfortunately?
I saw, even if we think about the death of George Floyd, to me, that was a setback, but it was also a setup for some of the work that we're seeing now, because it was almost like this rude awakening, and people started writing all these statements and started contributing, want to hear Black and brown voices who had been marginalized. So I feel like that there is a window, and it seems like it's closing. And I think we have to know that it's passing and not take it for granted. But to, again, think about what steps, again, we each can take to bring about change. Each one teach one, each one bring a person along and continue to be, I say, good stewards in this area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because again, it's for everyone. Everybody benefits. And one of the things that I was going to share, which I can, so we talk about, again, all of this to me is removing barriers, but we have to be able to identify those barriers to getting to where we need to be. And there are numerous barriers, both invisible and visible. And we have to be astute enough to recognize the invisible barriers. And those are some of the systems, the policies, the practices, and procedures that we just take for granted. That's the way it's always been. But people made these policies. We may not, even if we didn't create them, and some people don't feel the responsibility to make the change because I didn't create them, but they may be maintaining and perpetuating them. That's why they still are here.
There's an African proverb that says, if your vision is 1 year, plant rice. If your vision is 10 years, plant trees. If your vision is 100 years, train people.
Exactly.
And I feel that this is we've been in this movement for 163 years since the end of the Civil War. We have been in this movement for 400 years since we landed. So we cannot assume that any grant program, any set of guidelines, even any declaration of independence is going to create the contract and the constitution of inclusion. And so we applaud you for your work. And I want to introduce you to friend, colleague, and mentor, Ros McPherson. Ms. Ros McPherson is a thought leader for thought leaders. She is a facilitator of thinking, particularly with institutions of brick and mortar that are trying to be permanent, static, and elastic
Ah.
to the needs of their communities at the same time. Welcome, Roz.
Hello, everybody. And that was wonderful, Dr. Wanda, because we all have to remain in these trenches out here.
Absolutely.
So when Linwood asked me about participating, I was thinking about the fact that for most of my career, I've been on the business side of history, and in particular, Black history. I look at myself as a conduit. We go in and out of many different worlds. And just about everything that Barbara talked about, because I've worked on cemetery projects. Matter of fact, when I was in high school, we'd go to the cemetery on Halloween night with our cheap wine. So until I had to really get serious about cemeteries, or I'm from Louisiana originally. So when my mom wanted to go look for her father's headstone out in the cemetery in Bruley, Louisiana, I said, I'm not going up in there with those snakes. So when Barbara talks about the important work of clearing, absolutely, absolutely. So Linwood, I would like to actually throw up a PowerPoint and go through that quickly and then have questions, because
Yes, because the work is so profound, and this is visually exciting.
Yeah.
Work here.
Yeah. So
And we have in the salon with us two important change agents of the board. Annie, who is past president and the chair of governance for this new physical plant, and Mark Smith. So they'll be listening from
all right.
many levels, from the institutional responsibility, but in the incorporation of the spirit of the movement into
Okay.
the rebranding a place.
Sounds good.
Right.
So Ashley, okay, I think I've got it here. And I think when Dr. Wanda was on, she just left it in this mode. So I'm gonna do the same thing. For some reason, I'm seeing this chat function. Is that mine? Let's see if I can close out of it. So I am screen share. Okay, there we go. All right, so I thought I'd start off and tell people a little bit about my background. So my dad was a career officer in the military. And so we had the benefit of living in different countries in the 50s and very early 60s when I was growing up. So I just gave you a sense of my age because I have a milestone coming up next month. And back in the olden days, the children were on the passport with their mother. So here we are. And I'm actually the mother of 3. And for 8 years before coming to Philadelphia, I lived in the DC area. And this picture down here on the right is me with cousins in Arnottville, Louisiana, where our great uncle, who was a formerly enslaved person, left us 12 acres of land that we still have to this day, which is major. And we have vowed that we will keep those 12 acres in the family. And then, of course, you see us up here with my parents as we traveled to France in 1958, where we lived for 4 years. It was kind of interesting to go to France, where we lived on the Atlantic coast, and speak French when my people came from Creole country. So some of that was very familiar. And then in the middle, you'll see my 2 late aunties, Aunt Dolly McPherson on the left here, and Dr. Maya Angelou, who was my godmother, and I don't always publicize that. But I'm down here in Winston-Salem today at Wake Forest, and my Aunt Dolly was the first Black professor at Wake Forest in 1974. So Dr. Wanda, when you mentioned times when, and that same year, Dr. Herman Urey came on as a biology professor, first Black male. So I was down here in September because the university named streets after them, which was a pretty amazing honor because I was coming down here to visit Aunt Dolly and the crew since 1974 when they left New York, when she left New York. And I know the kind of groundbreaking work that had to occur related to civil rights and ensuring that the few Black students who came through, and even though those numbers increased, they had a haven they could go to because of Aunt Dolly and Auntie Maya. So that's critically important. And I think about, when I look at my family heritage, we've been going around the world as ambassadors and as people living amongst the people, different people. And so that is part of my fiber and has been from the beginning. So I've run a company for 17 years, but prior to starting this company, I was in publishing starting in 1976. My first job was as an editor of social studies textbooks. So you figure the bicentennial year, they were starting to look at cutting and pasting a sentence here or there or a picture here or there, and that was diversity and inclusion, if you will. But I also have to tell you that most people don't realize that it is the major urban cities that are called the Council of Great City Schools now that really made a difference in terms of those textbooks and educational materials long before the rest of the world caught on. If you wanted to make that sales forecast in Los Angeles or New York or some of these places, and Rochester and Detroit were real forward thinking, then you had to develop materials that were far more inclusive. And even though we hear the madness that's going on in Florida, those folks in Broward and Miami-Dade County made big time demands on what needed to be in those books. So when I hear all of this craziness that's going on right now, it's like we're reverting a bit, but I think that we're going to all have to wake up and make a difference. So I've been about cultivating and managing ideas that result in culturally relevant interactions pretty much since 1976, when I first came into educational product development. So here are some of the things that we do in our work. We manage projects. We're real strategic marketers. I'm still having to jump on folks from ad agencies that come and present concepts that are not at all inclusive. That what they say is, we'll put it in later. And I've advised clients to not consider that firm at all, because this is no longer about later. And we do a lot of focus groups and public engagement. And like Dr. Wanda, we conduct diversity audits and training, and we actually build exhibits. So here's some things I just jotted down about the current situation from my vantage point. The news is, I got to stop watching the news, because it is so disheartening and frustrating to hear the rhetoric and the things that are being said. It's just unbelievable to me that here you hear 1976, I started with product development that was culturally inclusive or evolving in that direction. And now to hear this stuff going on. I also sense that because of the current state of affairs, some folks are having a little bit of DEI fatigue, and it's not at the staff level, it's at the level where people really need it. And that is in leadership. You know, when a lot of our Black folks come, and back in the old day, they used to think they were making us happy by giving us Black employee groups. And then when a layoff would come, mysteriously, we were all the first to be let go because we had been pre-identified. So my thing is that a lot of the DEI really those messages need to be with board members and people who are very resistant. And you have leadership at a lot of nonprofits, and even in our history and cultural arts world, that are afraid they're going to lose a donation from a deep pocketed donor.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily, they're caught in a bind, so to speak. So, you know, Dr. Wanda talked a lot about, you know, some of the ignorance that goes with definitions. And I just think that this stuff is pretty far reaching. So one of the things, I wanted to make this point, that our elders and ancestors continue to move forward. We come from very strong stock. And I'm very excited that there are a number of African-American history centers in the planning stages around the country. As a matter of fact, I just came back from Huntington, West Virginia, where we're probably going to do a feasibility study for them. And we're going to work on the Bruce Watkins Cultural Heritage Center in Kansas City. Those things make me so happy because I'm meeting that people down in the trenches that are so committed to ensuring that our history is out there. The museum in DC was a game changer because money was invested so that we weren't having to have situations where you're putting tape up on the windows and doors to put flyers, and you could do a really credible institution. So yes, I believe that progress is definitely being made. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I want we do a lot of community engagement or public engagement, because I also have indicated that I sometimes have a problem with the word community and the way it's used, because it's a way of trying to put us all in one category as opposed to celebrating the diverse thoughts and backgrounds that we have among Black people. So we do a lot of those focus groups, and I think it's so important to listen to people. They have to be heard. You have to go to these sites to get a feel for the people in the area when you're doing this work. You have to conduct extensive market research, not just content research, because at the end of the day, you have to build audience if you want to drive more income to these important institutions. And strategic marketing is very much a part of this. So, Linwood, I'm actually answering your question about best practices when I'm saying some of this stuff. The team has had to learn to listen with intention, compassion, and respect, because you have a lot of people out there who have not felt any respect or compassion. You've got to become adept at interpreting what we heard. Because when you start these kinds of projects, it's not just about us coming with our historic research. Folks out there in the world have a lot to say about what happened once upon a time in their neighborhood or their town. And, we're just starting to get some of this stuff to be public. And also metrics and benchmarks. In other words, how do we know that we have actually done our jobs when we are putting together these culturally inclusive and diverse experiences? So just quickly, this is an example of some of the community meetings. And I will tell you that in one instance, a guy sitting out in the audience came up to the design schematics of a playground and recommended a change that the architects actually incorporated into the design. So many times there are golden nuggets out there in that audience, and people come prepared to voice things. We also make sure we attend a lot of cultivation events, because some of those one-on-one conversations with potential donors, let's face it, some of these folks are very much supporters of the former president. I don't have to tell you folks who was at the Union League receiving the Lincoln Award a couple of weeks ago, which I found to be absolutely disgraceful. And I'm not trying to get into anybody's politics, but in this day and age, in a city like Philadelphia, how does that happen? But it tells you that there is an undercurrent out there that has bubbled to the surface. So Linwood knows that this was one of our biggest projects that we managed, the President's House down at the Liberty Bell. And this project, which is on park service land, is the result of public outcry to tell the truth about the Independence Mall that had no discussion of slavery at all. And the resistance was intense. Then the African American Museum in Philadelphia. Yes.
Roz, before you go forward, so I need to share with all of you, because my love of history. George Washington owned enslaved people.
Yes.
His capital was in Philadelphia. And because Pennsylvania had passed the Gradual Abolition Act, which said that if you stand on Pennsylvania soil for 6 months and 1 day, you are free, George Washington wrote a manual for congressmen of how to rotate your enslaved people out of Pennsylvania so that they would not achieve freedom. This is the manual that James Madison, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson used. So they exposed a side of George Washington for the people of Philadelphia in the Constitutional Center, near the Independence Center, near the Liberty Bell, a set of stories that nobody had ever been taught in their 6th grade, 8th grade, or 12th grade history classes. And it was shocking in the city of brotherly love. Shocking in the sense of Frederick Douglass's agitate, agitate, agitate.
Yes, yes. And thank you for that, Linwood, because this is, to me, one of my seminal moment projects, because it's an honor to do this work. And the irony is that I lived in Alexandria, Virginia before coming to Philadelphia, right near Mount Vernon. So his enslaved folks used to get rotated back to Mount Vernon. So there's some sort of divine intervention that brought me to this and to this project. And for anybody who thought it was a hoax, that architectural dig right there actually revealed the structural remains of the actual first executive mansion. So it even changed the footprint for the design of the project because it made us realize that there were things about the house that were not accurate on some of the drawings. So this kind of work is intense. And just another thing, we had to terminate the first exhibit team that was contracted on this project because they refused to go deep enough in the history of telling us that there was none, and were prepared to have pink ladies in ball gowns, the kind of thing that's notoriously famous in many of the history institutions around town. And that would have never worked. So to come up with the problem solving and solution to how do you tell Black history when we know what went down, we might not be able to perfectly draw the faces, but it requires a whole nother level of research. So thank you for that.
And one last thing is, Washington was insidious.
Yes. And by the way, most of his enslaved persons were owned by his wife, but you know, back in the day, the wife, the husband had authority even over his wife's property.
Because Philadelphia is a Quaker community, and because the first resistance was the Germantown Mennonite resistance in 1688, Washington realized that his enslaved people should not be seen in his home. So he had secret passages built, Mark. He had underground tunnels. They weren't seen. They passed through. This is the kind of insidiousness of history that distills racism into an institutional form that is acceptable.
Yes, yes. And we also had the honor of overseeing the construction design of the Octavius Catto statue. And as you know, he was a young civil rights advocate, teacher, Negro League baseball player who was assassinated at the age of 32 as he advocated for the rights of Blacks to vote. So this brown ball up here is a representation of a ballot box from that day and time. And then the pillars behind Catto give you a sense of the history of his accomplishments. So the young man who won the project he became Catto in terms of his in-depth research, and gave this powerful interpretive experience that I love it when there's a protest going on, that it usually now starts at the Catto statue, which is, to me, very, very powerful. And sometimes you'll see little kids out there trying to imitate the pose. So the last thing I wanted to share with you.
Could I go back to Catto just a moment?
Sure.
So this is the book into our project.
Yes.
Because Catto and Thomas Morris Chester were Grand Marshals of the Grand Review of the United States Colored Troops in Harrisburg. Catto was the chairman of the first Colored Convention after the Civil War in Pittsburgh, and Thomas Morris Chester was the secretary. They both recruited for the 54th and 55th Massachusetts. And so this is Brother Catto. You know, it's the book into our monument on the Capitol grounds, Doctor, which is the first African-American monument on our Capitol grounds, and the first monument to the value of the vote, is the book into Catto, who lost his life trying to support the vote, who was shot in cold blood in the light of day, 1/2 block away from Mother Bethel Church, Philadelphia. So the cultural grounding of these two men form an important narrative. And we hope that Philadelphia and Harrisburg, the capital, join in building this history, filling in the road.
And I must tell you that the current mayor of Philadelphia, Jim Kenney, was the person who initiated this project when he was a city council person, because Caddo was assassinated in his neighborhood. So this was a culturally diverse committee that committed to this project, and Independence Blue Cross put up $500,000. And of course, there were other contributors to this, the city under Mayor John Street and Mayor Nutter, and Congressman Shaka Fatah funded this project. And then after the having to redesign it because of the dig, we went back to the table to raise more money. So this is an incredibly important project. And the reason I selected some of these is that as the person who pulls these projects together, I'm determined with each of these that I'm going to build a culturally diverse team, because there's not a lot of people out there that do all of the technical aspects of this work, but it's my job to find them. So that one of those archaeologists was an African-American woman from the University of Maryland, Dr. Cheryl LaRoche. And boy, did she bring powerful insights to the project. And so when folks tell you we can't find any, I make sure that we go out and we find them. And the young man who did the Caddo statue is of Haitian descent, grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York. He also did Adam Clayton Powell on 125th Street. And he has a degree in engineering from Cornell, but he's an artist. So what you have to go through to make sure you bring a sensitized historian team to the table, people who can write label copy with sensitivity. And what I was going to share with you is that from my 25 some years in publishing, a lot of the content exists in my head. So I know when stuff is missing. You know, having worked for Time Life, I knew with the President's House project that we had to include something about the indigenous presence there. Again, being told they weren't there. I had sketches and books of Native American folks coming to negotiate treaties while George Washington and John Adams were present. So I'm also very sensitive to the fact that inclusion in the history business means you can't leave out some of the others who are marginalized. We got to really look at the breadth of a fuller picture. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And thank you for allowing me to share this, because as you can tell, this work turns me on.
But I need to ask you, just before you stop, would
Yes.
you go back to the African American Museum of,
Yes.
of Philadelphia?
Yes. Yes.
And talk to our guests in the virtual time and those who are in the salon about the challenge of technology?
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, wait a minute. I hope I can bring it back up. Are you all able to? Okay, here we go. So back here. Okay. So here's the other thing that happens in this business. Technology proceeds very quickly. And this was an interesting project on many levels. And I was very happy to be able to include Malefi Asante and some of the other folks, because Malefi had worked with me on that Time Life project as well, as did Henry Louis Gates, as did Dr. Spencer Crew. So, you know, I've got a whole posse out there. And now I'm looking for the younger ones, because it is torch passing time. And I love it when I encounter the new powerful brains in the business of history, because that's also what makes things credible. So since we did not have all kinds of portraits of folks for this project, what we did instead was to create what we called agency stations, where historic Philadelphians could tell their stories through these video presentations. And I'm trying to think of the woman who directed this. She's down there in Alabama, and I just saw her on the Today Show because she's actually taught acting and stuff to a number of very famous people. Her name's going to come to me. Tanisha something. I'll share that later. But so we used these and WHYY allowed us to film without charging us at their studios. So these were motion activated agency stations, so that when you walk up to them, the folks would automatically start speaking to you. Now, the exhibit is now almost 12 years old, so it's definitely time to refresh it or create something new, because a lot of these technologies have gone by the wayside, and it becomes difficult to order parts, because anytime you have this stuff, you got to be sensitive to long-term sustainability. Another important thing we've dealt with in the museum business, or the historic center business, thanks to COVID, you know how touchscreens have become very, very popular? Well, we're not touching screens these days. So you have to rethink all of the technicalities of that. Often the job of the design team and a fabricator. And for this project, I found the only Black fabrication firm in the country out in Dayton, Ohio, Display Dynamics. They also did the fabrication of the Intrepid ship out there in New York Harbor. So when you talk about going on the hunt for the teams that can put this together, and we also ensured that for this project and the President's House, the RFP, which I run for all of these projects, had a design build process, which allows there to be a lead firm, and you charge them with going out there to find diverse talent to work on the project. So
what was interesting about this is it was mind blowing when
yes.
when it first opened.
Yes. It was mind-blowing in several ways, because first of all, the funders were shocked that this museum pulled it off, because you know, many of our institutions are underfunded. And at first, the money that PICO gave had been designated for, I think it was a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation. And the Constitution Center actually undercut the African American Museum, and they bought the copy. And I said to Ramona Risco Benson, who was the president at that time, why don't you see if they'll approve of you doing a very dynamic exhibit? And we even gave her some sketches to sell the donors on it. And lo and behold, they approved it. And I'll tell you what made me suggest, and this is an interactive exhibit, because this is a museum that does not have lots of collections, okay? So we knew we were not going to be displaying a lot of objects. They simply didn't have it. And you have to take into account things like climate control. So when I was living down in DC and I took my little child to the archives to see the Emancipation Proclamation on display, and we stood out there one winter for almost 3 hours, and we finally got in. And when we got to the document, my child said, "You mean to tell me we stood online all this time to see a piece of paper?" And that was an innocent truth. And I said to Ramona, we have to give more than just a document, because young people these days can entertain themselves better at home than they can when they come to some of these institutions. And you have to keep that in mind when you're creating an immersive experience.
And that is the challenge with this
Yes.
exhibit today,
Yes,
because
Yeah.
the technology,
yes,
the content is exciting. but the
yes.
presentation style and the technology has surpassed. The kids can invent movies
Yeah.
while they're waiting in line.
Yes.
You know, like it's exciting. And so this museum is now challenged with how do we bring the technology forward? How do we?
Well, the fact of the matter is, about a year and a half ago, I actually worked on the request for proposal to do part 2, which this one goes up to 1876. Now there's an opportunity to go beyond 1876. So, and I think with the fact that the museum is about to have a new location and they have a new president, stay tuned. Something is going to happen that upgrades that exhibit experience. And so there you have.
3 questions.
Sure.
The first deals with new presidents. Institutions in general and museums in particular are often like the QE2 in that they turn very slowly in the water. It takes a huge thing to turn an institution. So how do you maintain, these are multi-year projects.
Yes.
How do you maintain the changing governance
Yes.
in
So
an institution, the
Yeah.
continuity of governance?
that's a critical question. So one thing I'm going to say is selecting forward-thinking board members is critical to the process. We have moved away from an era where people want to be on a board because it makes their resume look good. It is time to make sure that when you are selecting board members, that these people will have skin in the game, commitment, and know how to bring some resources to the table, because people don't just write checks to Black stuff like they used to do back in the 70s and 80s out of guilt. They want to know that this is an investment that's worthwhile and that you're going to build an audience. So, and this is an era where forward thinking and young talent is required, because I personally am in torch passing mode. I don't have a problem admitting that I'll be 70 next month. I've been out here a long time, and I want to impart all of this stuff to the next team of folks. So when Ashley came to town, and I think she came to us from Underground Railroad, dynamic forward thinking. There's an amazing young woman at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Dr. Brittany Webb. I see some of our Erica Armstrong Dunbar, Nicole Hannah Jones. I'm loving seeing these people, meeting them and encouraging them and telling them that I can be a quiet resource to you in whatever you need. So I know that's a long drawn out answer.
No, that was great. My
Okay.
next question is, we're building this Mount Rushmore of DEI exemplars. Who would you put up there?
I'm going to tell you the 2 people I automatically thought of. One was Isabel Wilkerson, because cast.
Oh, bravo.
Oh my God. And the other person I thought of was that young woman from the Middle East who had the acid thrown in her face. What a symbol of courage she is for the female experience. Truly, truly. So those are the two that came to my mind first and foremost, because the writings of Isabel are outstanding, and everybody needs to read those books to have a context for where this country is and to help us not fall back. Listen, I went into the Wake Forest bookstore, and they're called the deacons and the demons. I said I wasn't buying a shirt that said demon on it. And the other thing I loved, and Dr. Wanda, you'll appreciate this, Brian Stevenson is their guest speaker next week here at Wake Forest. Now, that's a full circle moment to me, because when Dolly got here back in 1974, that would have never happened. And so that's my Mount Rushmore. And there's one other thing I wanted to just throw out there loosely as we are navigating the DEI space. It's important for the board members and leaders who are kicking and screaming to be in these sessions. And one of the first questions I asked them because I recruit board members in many instances. I've brought 17 people of color to the Man Centers board, and they can pay the $15,000. Don't assume everybody can't pay, because we've got some lawyers and stuff who can. And I say, how many of you socialize with people who don't look like you in your personal private endeavors? And most of the time they get this quizzical look because they've never invited people who are their Black peers to their homes for a cocktail party. So these are the kinds of nuances that we have to address. And yes, we want to hang out with them because they're critical to our fundraising efforts for these projects.
We're a few minutes over, but I'd like to ask you, Roz, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment to Dr. Wanda, and the same thing, Dr. Wanda, if you'd like to ask Roz a question or make a comment about her work or her presentation.
I'm just I'm spell struck. I am amazed. I mean, the work that you're doing. Oh, I'm from North Carolina, by the way.
Okay.
So Reedsville, Greensboro area. So my family's there. But
Yes.
just to hear your stories and the difference. I have a background also in museums. And,
Okay.
working in these spaces. So I'm just pleased to hear your story and hear its impact. That's the key for me, the impact. And you're making it visible. And I think a lot of the DEI work that we do, I've always say IV, and that's what I'm working on. Also,
Yeah.
my work, IV, we need an infusion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That and impact is the I, and the
Yes.
V, making it visible, IV, make it
Yes.
visible so people can see and know, experience all of those kinds of things. So mine is more of a comment than a question, but thank you.
And my comment is that we get to stay in touch with one another, because we become resources to each other as we expand our network and increase the impact. So I like to thank Linwood for making this important introduction so that we can be on this journey together.
You know, my card says catalytic agent.
Yes.
I think of myself as yeast, or glue. Doctor, I always say the glue really shouldn't show. If the glue is showing, it's a bad job. So that, but I will show, as my people say tonight, to inform you and encourage you all to connect. We are all we've got.
Yes.
And working together, we can make a change. I'm going to say good night for now. This will be posted, thanks to Ashley, and we in every session we're thanking Ashley for bringing so many diverse pieces together in such a gentle and kind stewardship of this series.
Yes.
We thank the board of the library for daring to build the Thomas Morris Chester, and we encourage and demand that you put the name on the door. After 4 months, the name Chester is still not on the front door. I'm kind of getting to believe that you all don't want to do it. And I need you to prove me wrong. I need to see Thomas Morris. I need to see a Black man's name on a major building in downtown Harrisburg. After 3 weeks, I said they're just getting the sawdust out of their noses. After 6 weeks, I said we're trying to work out governance. But after 4 months, I think it's time to put the man's name on the door. So that's my agitate. I encourage you to look around your own communities, your own lives for the evidence of your Mount Rushmore, of your icons and exemplars. And above all, I encourage you to work together. In like I always do with my father's saying, Dr. which was, you have to have turf before you can have turf wars. Okay, so we need to stop struggling with each other, circle the wagons, and make a change. We'll see you in March with very great discussion on making history matter with our friend Miss Whaley from the American Revolutionary
Love her.
Museum, and Sister Avashni Dubois from the Colored Girls Museum, and hopefully our guest of this evening, Elise Irvis, will be able to join us here in the to talk about. She is the granddaughter of Kay Leroy Irvis, and she'll talk about the dual responsibility of maintaining a legacy and at the same time making your own signature. So God bless you till we meet again. Meet us at the crossroads of ideas. Take good care of yourself. Be well till we see you again.